Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this evening's talks. My name is Priyesh Mystery. I'm the Associate Curator for Modern and Contemporary Projects at the National Gallery, and I am fortunate to be able to work on a programme at the museum that explores the intersection between the contemporary and the historic. We mainly do this by working with artists practicing today to explore the gallery's iconic collection through exhibitions, residencies, and commissions. All of which is why I'm especially pleased to be introducing this evening's event, which is the final of a trilogy of evenings curated by Art in Flux with National Gallery X. For those of you new to this branch of our activities, National Gallery X is a partnership with King's College London, and it takes form in a physical space just next door to the National Gallery, but also a virtual platform, which allows us at the gallery to explore all things digital and technology and what that could mean for the future of public museums. These three events produced with Art in Flux have been exploring contemporary media art practice across different themes concerning identity, psychology, and the human existence. And it has been such a great pleasure to hear from a huge range of artists working in technology in such a broad and fascinating way. This evening's event is curated by the formidable artist and curator Aphra Shemza on the subject of South Asian cultural heritage and the media arts. I am looking forward to hearing from our artists this evening, as I hope you are too. So without further ado, I will hand over to Aphra to get started.
A very warm welcome to you all. I'm Aphra Shemza, and tonight I'm your curator and host, and also an artist speaker myself. I'm a multimedia artist who works predominantly with light, abstraction, and interactivity. My keen interest in modernism, my Islamic cultural heritage, creating art for all, and advocating for a more sustainable practice are all central themes within my work. This evening, I am your curator as a co-founder of Art in Flux. For those of you who are new to a Flux event, Flux was founded in 2016 by the artists Maria Almina, Oliver Gingrich, and myself. We were formed as an artist-led platform that works with artists working at the intersection of art and technology. A couple of housekeeping notes just before we get started, and in case you're new to Zoom, we found that selecting the active speaker mode in the top right-hand corner is the most comfortable viewing mode, as it allows you to just see one speaker at a time. Our programme this evening will run from 6:30 till 8 p.m, with presentations until about 20 to 8, after which we will have an artist Q&A. If you have any questions for the artist, please feel free to write them in the Q&A box below, and we'll endeavour to get round to them in the end. This evening's event is being recorded, and the National Gallery will host that video on their YouTube channel after the fact, and we will send that round to all the attendees. I'm now delighted to hand over to my colleague Maria Almina, who will share a little bit more about Art in Flux and what we do.
My name is Maria Almena. I'm a multidisciplinary artist, creative director of the studio Kimatica, as well as curator and co-founder of Art in Flux. And I'm delighted to be here once again at this event in collaboration with National Gallery X. My practice combines performative experiences, interactivity, light, and the human body, exploring the intersection between them and the subconscious and the creative processes. I research perception, rituals, well-being, and embodiment to inspire reconnection with deep human emotions and enhance human connections. I mainly create interactive participatory installations and new media performances, always with a therapeutic, holistic approach. Art in Flux was founded in 2016 by artists for artists. We have grown from a loose forum of 30 artists into a group of 2,000 practicing artists, all working from the intersection between art and technology. We have created a platform for media artists to work with institutions. So far, we have worked with DNA Museum and National Gallery X, and many universities such as Goldsmith and Royal College of Art. This year, we also collaborated with Ars Electronica for the very first time, the biggest media art festival in the world. We run many different kinds of events throughout the year. Our Flux socials are key to our organization as they provide a forum for collaboration and exchange of ideas as artists come together in a peer-led environment. Our large curated talks events allow us to bring key themes from the media arts community to the general public. Now I'm going to hand over to Oliver Gingrich.
Thank you, Maria. My name is Oliver Gingrich. I'm co-founder of Art in Flux. I'm a media artist and a researcher focusing on mixed reality, holographic projection, visual sound, and neuroart. And together with the art collective and Alemma Group, we're examining the relationship between sound and vision, very often resulting in immersive collaborative artworks. As a researcher, I've been investigating participatory art practices at the National Center for Computer Animation, for instance, in the context of the Granville community, or as a means for social connectedness, which now seems more important than ever. To profile pioneering, groundbreaking media artists, Art in Flux regularly curates exhibitions. Our first exhibition, Art in Flux Experiments in Media Arts Now, at Ugly Duck, turned into a small festival. Last year, we were invited to co-curate the Event 2 exhibition, celebrating 50 years of the Computer and Art Society. And this year, our annual exhibition was part of the Ars Electronica Festival, and it will now be shown at the Digital Weekend, curated by Maria Almena. Our workshop program makes artistic practices accessible to the wider public, and we're excited to have developed various online workshops in 2020. Responding to the need for more virtual live events this year, Flux Events presents conversations around key topics in the media arts in our Flux Live program. Flux Live is supported by the Arts Council England, and all of our events are now accessible via Art in Flux YouTube channel. Finally, we're very honored to have been invited by the team at the National Gallery to discuss contemporary media arts topics in the context of the National Gallery. Whereas Gender Tech, curated by myself, focused on gender and media arts, Levitations, curated by Maria Almena, presented media arts practices in the context of health and well-being. Recordings of these events are available online on the Art in Flux website. And now, without any further ado, I'm excited to hand over to my colleague Aphra Shemza, curator of tonight's event, Shifting Ground.
Thank you so much, Oliver. So tonight's event is centered around media art practice and South Asian cultural heritage. And this is a topic that I explore within my own practice and is a keen research interest of mine. Tonight, we will see presentations from myself and Stuart Batchelor as we launch the Shemza Digital project, alongside the incredible artists Prem, Sahib, Rehana, Zaman, and Bishi. We all explore ideas centered around identity, cultural heritage, and migration within our work. Tonight, we will discuss how our shared South Asian cultural heritage informs our practice and how technology allows us to explore these themes in new and exciting ways. We will consider the impact and legacy that South Asian migration has had on British contemporary culture and celebrate the rich and diverse voices within the media arts scene. Recently, there's been a rethinking of the importance of migrant voices within British art history. And first-generation British South Asian artists like Anwar, Jalal, Shemza, and Rasheed, Araeen are being shown in museum exhibitions globally, and the history books are being rewritten and rethought. These new conversations allow a space for a new dialogue to start to take place, a new conversation for the 21st century around the legacy of South Asian migration and its impact on contemporary arts practitioners working in the UK today. This event takes root in the National Gallery's collection. So before I start and introduce the speakers, I would just like to go through some themes and concepts that I've been researching in relation to the National Gallery's collection. This is not from a strictly historical point of view, but more from an artist perspective with a passion for history, looking to compare and contrast the past and the present. First, I looked at where the National Gallery's collection came closest to the east, and I found this portrait by Jontil Bellini of Sultan Mehmet II from the 1940s. Jontil Bellini was an Italian painter of the Venice School, and Sultan Mehmet II was ruler of the Islamic Ottoman Empire, and one of the most powerful men in the world when this painting was created. Either side of the Sultan, we see these pillars which represent the Venice style. And we also see 3 crowns, which represent Greece, Trebizond, and Asia, which were the countries that the Sultan ruled over. In Latin, we see inscribed, ruler of the world. And I think it's really important to note just how powerful the Islamic Empire really was. Underneath the Sultan, we see a bejeweled cloth, which represents his wealth, and also we see detailed here floral motifs, which are often found within Islamic art. Floral and geometric patterns are often found within Islamic art and architecture, and these were some of my grandfather's earliest inspirations for his art practice. If we zoom forward to the present day now, in Shemza Digital, my latest project, we explore abstraction and geometry in a digital age. Another artist that really took my inspiration in the National Gallery's collection was Pompeo Battoni, who is an Italian painter from the 18th century who often depicted young English men who were taking part in the Grand Tour. He was known for making portraits that looked rather sexy, and the Grand Tour was a journey that English gentlemen took across Europe, supposedly for their education, but mostly to drink and party. In the 18th century, Italy was a place for freedom of expression and sexual exploration. In Prem Sahib's latest exhibition, Descent, held earlier this year at Southard Reed, he explores notions regarding intimacy, desire, and community. Juxtaposed against these rather opulent and flamboyant portraits from the National Gallery, here in Prem's work, we see a more haunted sense of refuge and identity, invoking human presence, absence, and return. The National Gallery's collection's depiction of women is often seen through the male gaze. And here in the Rokeby Venus, we see the goddess depicted as a reclining nude figure with her face blurred in the mirror. This is almost as though the artist is trying to personify female beauty and allow us to make up what she looks like in our own minds. In Rehana's Zaman's work, Tell Me a Story of All of These Things, she explores what it means to be a British Muslim woman in the UK today. And I wanted to draw upon this notion of the depiction of the female form in art. On the one hand, in the gallery's collection, we see a female figure created by a man showing this white female goddess. And on the other hand, more recently, we have an artist sharing her and her sister's intimate experience about their lives. In the film, she uses a CGI figure which is caught between a mixture of terror and desire. And this to me seems like a much truer conversation and a world away from this idealized depiction of a female form that you find in the collection. I had assumed that it would be easy to find a queen depicted in the National Gallery's collection, but I was actually dismayed to see that there are only 2 queens depicted. So I'll just note that the National Gallery's collection is obviously of its time. There are very few female artists represented, and mainly often women depicted through the male gaze. I won't go into this topic a little bit further because my colleague Oliver will be exploring this in event more next year, which I'm very excited about. But one of the images I did find was of Elizabeth Stuart, Queen of Bohemia from 1642 by Gerrit van Honthurst. Here we see the Queen posing in a regal posture with elegant jewels and a dog by her side as a symbol of fidelity. In the next slide, we see Bishi, one of our speakers from our Albion Voice EP, where she sang Indian in skin, English at heart. Here she is in a mix of English regal attire and her Bengali heritage, posing here with a tiger. It's interesting to note just how far we have come from the original portrait of the Queen of Bohemia, with Bishi sitting at the forefront of a discourse around dual heritage and what it means to be British. So I'll leave you now with some of those ideas that really set the scene for the curatorial premise of the event. And I'm now going to change my hat from curator to artist and launch my latest collaborative project, Shemza Digital, which is based on the work of my grandfather. We'll now show you a short video, and then Stuart and I will go into the project in a little more detail after that. My name is Aphra Shemza. I'm a multimedia artist who works with light, abstraction, and interactivity.
My name is Stuart Batchelor, and I'm an interactive digital artist who works the intersection of traditional painting and software art.
My grandfather was the well-known painter Anwar Jalal Shemza. He came over to London in the 50s from Pakistan and studied at the Slade School of Fine Art. In 1962, my grandfather created a painting called 1 to 9 and 1 to 7. On it, inscribed in Urdu, was the quote, "One circle, one square, one problem, one life is not enough to solve it." In Shemza Digital, the artist Stuart Batchelor and myself are continuing the legacy of my grandfather.
Inspired by his writings and aesthetics, we are reimagining them through creative technology.
It's about making art accessible to everybody.
Collaboration is a key part of software art. It can enable anyone to become an artist. We want you to get involved. This piece is about your contribution. We can't wait to see what you'll create.
So as you know, I'm the granddaughter of the well-known painter Anwar Jalal Shemza. I didn't get to meet my grandfather because he died before I was born, but I've always had a deep connection with him through his art practice, and he's one of my biggest artistic inspirations to date. Anwar came over to London from Pakistan in the 50s and studied at the Slade School of Fine Art. One of his art history lecturers was the well-recognized Ernst Gombrich. Ernst Gombrich published The Story of Art in 1950, and we now know it to be a very biased history of art from a Western point of view. So it wasn't surprising then that in one of my grandfather's art history lectures, Ernst Gombrich dismissed all Islamic art as being purely functional, and my grandfather was dismayed to hear this. He stormed out of his lecture feeling really, really frustrated, and he decided to destroy all of the work that he'd created so far in the UK. He wanted to come back to basics and he created his own unique style, which combined Western modernism with Eastern influences, or as he put it, one circle, one square, one problem, one life is not enough to solve it. Alongside my art practice, I'm manager of the estate of Anwar Jalal Shemza. Our main aim is to provide a platform for the work of my grandfather, working alongside Javeri Contemporary and Hales. In the last 10 years and through my work at the estate, I've seen that there's been a rethinking of the importance of migrant artists within British art history, and these artists are now being given the recognition that they so surely deserve. These new advances have not yet really filtered down into the mainstream school curriculum, and young people don't really know about a lot of these artists. I wanted to find a way to introduce my grandfather's work to the masses, and I thought and hoped that a participatory art project would do just that. Now, more than ever in our increasingly polarized society, I believe it's important that we champion the rich and diverse voices within British art history. In my own practice, I fuse methodologies from the past with new innovations to imagine what the role of art could be in the future. I combine traditional sculpting techniques with the latest technology to create my pieces. Practically speaking, I am a sculptor, and I work with physical materials like light, wood, metal, and plastic. Due to the pandemic, as I'm sure is the case for many of us, I was forced to adapt my practice to this new digital and online realm that we now find ourselves in today. I decided to take a key and core part of my work, interactivity, and created and designed a project for the public to take part in whilst they were at home self-isolating. And the Shemza Digital project was born out of that. A couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting the artist Stuart Batchelor, who presented his work at one of our Art in Flux socials to our artist community. Since then, he's exhibited his work with us and also created a workshop called Painting with Code that we held at the V&A Museum and Royal College of Art. I really admired his work and was looking for a great opportunity to collaborate with him. I'll now hand over to Stuart, who will tell you a little bit more about his work, our project, and most importantly, how you can get involved.
Thank you, Aphra, and hello to everybody watching. My name is Stuart Faromarz Batchelor, and I'm a media artist who combines traditional art and drawing with creative coding to create paintings that are more than just a surface. They're interactive applications, animated, audible, data-driven, and intermedial. At the core of my practice is this idea of what it means to create a painting in the 21st century. That is, paintings that take advantage of modern technologies. I explore this not just from a design and aesthetics perspective, but also how the form of paintings and audience participation changes when introduced to the world of software art. I've been fortunate enough to have produced several public-facing workshops as part of Art in Flux, where participants' drawings were transformed into virtual brushes that they then used to create works within a 3D application, bringing physicality and tangibility to the digital painting process. By creating digital drawing software, artists can encode their own rules into the system, inviting users to discover new ways of drawing where real-world physics do not apply and aesthetics are encoded into the digital paintbrush. For Shemza Digital, Aphra and I wanted to let users explore Anwar's art world in an interactive way, one where users could create their own unique work that still sits within his aesthetics and theory, that allows for users to collaborate with Anwar to make something new. From examining Anwar's prolific body of work, we set out to encode his iconic motifs into generative paint. We thought we'd start at the basics, a simple circle inside a square, and so this first paint became known as the Squircle. One of Anwar's most popular and minimal visual elements, and in keeping with how he used it, the Squircle paint allows users to create large fields of color that can be overlaid onto one another, creating new shapes within the intersections. For the second paint, Aphra and I noticed this knitted-like pattern across much of Anwar's work, perhaps the motif most directly inspired by his ancestry of carpet makers. These lattices of intersecting semicircles and squares are some of Anwar's most detailed and complex works. The users can explore this complexity through the weave paint that overlays this lattice at different scales with each new stroke, creating webs of intricate and beautiful patterns. Our last paint developed emergently from our experiments, exploring within the limitations of circles and squares. Aphra and I discovered the mosaic paint, a happy accident that could not have happened without Anwar's aesthetics as direction. Like the weave, the mosaic paint adheres to a grid structure that overlays circular rings on one stroke and squares on another. The mixing of these shapes can result in a minimal look or a complex one that has echoes of Anwar's Islamic geometry influence. Despite being more indirectly inspired by Anwar's work, fascinatingly, we still find echoes of similar motifs within his art, as can be seen here from composition with number 6. And though users can explore these paints individually, the app allows for any combination of them. It's up to the user to create their vision within the tools that we've given them, resulting in unanticipated artworks that remix Anwar's ideas and allows users to collaborate with him. We can't wait to see what everyone will create with this. Participation is a key part of this collective artwork, and this is just the beginning. We will be collecting everyone's contribution, which you can view, search, and explore anytime from within our archive webpage. What is even more exciting is that from these hundreds of contributions, We will create a new interactive light art installation in the next year, one that will be driven by all the artworks made so far and into the future. So we need your help and contributions to make this the largest participatory artwork ever made. The site has moments ago just been launched, so come and be a part of this new kind of artwork, one that lets the audience, wherever and whoever they are, become artists themselves, all through the lens of cultural heritage and migrant arts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stuart. I just can't wait to see what everyone produces. You can also engage with our project further. Perhaps you could invite us to do a talk or workshop at your university or school, or even become a partner for the light art installation next year. Do drop us an email to get in touch, info@shemza.digital. I will once again don my curatorial hat and move us from the abstract to the intimate work of our next speaker, Prem Sahib. Prem works across disciplines, and his work arises from convictions regarding intimacy, desire, and community. So please welcome Prem Sahib.
Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to begin with a few words about my practice in general, and then talk mostly through images of my work. I'll end with a short screening of a 6-minute video I made last year called Cul-de-sac. Although my practice consists mostly of sculpture and installation, I tend to work across different mediums, including painting, performance, and video. In the very broadest sense, I'm interested in structures that we inhabit which shape our sense of self, be it physical or environmental structures like architecture or social ones. My work usually starts from a biographical starting point, which incorporates my identity as a queer person of color. The image you see here is from my solo exhibition at the Kunstverein in Hamburg in 2018. I just wanted to point out a couple of works that I feel touch upon cultural heritage. The main work that occupies the room consists of 12 lockers presented on very low plinths. These were objects I'd salvaged from a well-known gay sauna in East London called Chariot Shoreditch, which closed in 2016 to make way for a luxury hotel development. A lot of my past work has focused on spaces where sex has been part of the design and which act as meeting places for certain communities, but also how these spaces have closed or transformed in recent years due to forces such as gentrification. I wanted to show you this work because I presented these found objects, the lockers, as artifacts which collectively, through their material culture, preserve a history of a space and community that is otherwise not so well documented. The lockers were bodily in their stature and contained stickers, signs, leaflets, and other paraphernalia for sexual health services, gay housing associations, and work by street artists. The title, "Do You Care? We Do," came from one of the stickers and summarized a big question for me, which is how does one navigate being an individual as part of a community? It also became a rhetorical suggestion about care, belonging, and isolation. To counter this use of the found object, and to speak of a particular cultural heritage and community, I also had a made object in the exhibition, which was an exact replica of my first birthday cake. In contrast to the lockers, this work spoke more directly about an individual. The sculpture was presented in a dark room and was spotlit theatrically. I worked with a food model maker who produced a copy of the cake in resin and rubber, working mostly from a family photograph. The tableau included the exact Remploy chairs and matchbox from the image, and there was something quite deathly and uncanny about standing in front of it, something almost out of body. The aesthetic was clearly very 80s, and it included things that I felt pointed towards my own South Asian heritage, such as the inclusion of my full name. The table and chairs were the sort found in a community hall, and the scale of the cake suggested a large celebration, which was significant because I was the first boy in the family. As a work, I was interested in thinking about how this object was something that was made to celebrate my identity before it had really emerged, but also how it was made to be consumed by a community and a family. And this is the original photograph from which I worked from as a reference. Moving ahead a few years to more recent work, in 2019, I made a 3-part exhibition at Southern Reed in London called Descent, which looked at descent both as a passage through time and space, as well as descent as lineage. Each part lasted 3 weeks, beginning with an installation, then a video in archive, and then the last part was an object response to earlier ones. Today, I'm just going to show you part 1 and 2. So part 1, People Come and Go, was modeled on a men-only gay cruising club in the neighborhood of the gallery. This immersive installation led viewers down a narrow corridor towards a small tunnel space. Essentially, I constructed a parallel version of the club in which anyone could enter and which meant viewers were literally transported elsewhere. I put in a new floor, lowered the ceiling, added new lighting, and by remaking this environment, I wanted to explore my own identity as a person of color moving through predominantly white and gendered spaces, or having experiences of racism that were intertwined with ideas around whiteness and desire. So beyond remaking the exact environment, I also used a performer of a specific demographic. So depending on when viewers came to the space, they may or may not come across a white male performer that appeared to be passed out or sleeping. The performer also appeared to be trapped in this environment for which I was suggesting they were the beneficiary of. I was also trying to speak about racism as an invisible framework and how how having realized parts of my identity in certain spaces and communities, such as the gay community, this was still a space where people like myself experience racism. And so just to give you an idea of the scale of the installation, this is a picture of it in my studio. So you can see the extent to which the gallery was quite radically transformed. And then 3 weeks later, when viewers came back for part 2, which was called Cul-de-sac, they were confronted with an archive and a video that you can see in the background of this image. So the vitrine of archival material belonged to my uncle, and the video in the background I shot in Southall, which is the area I grew up, and it's a suburb of West London with a large South Asian community. And in this particular exhibition, I wanted to explore my connection to, as well as disenfranchisement from, a place that I called home. After my dad passed away in 2018, I was intrigued to hear more about his experience as a young person arriving in this country, and how I heard about how he had been stabbed in the leg by the National Front during the race riots of 1979, for example. And my dad's older brother had been an outreach worker for people with drug addiction, HIV, and mental health issues, and was involved in a lot of community work and activism. And he mentioned to me that he had this folder of press clippings and material from that period. So it was through this that I was able to learn more about the area and his perspective on it, and how he was challenging mainstream narratives about the people that lived there. For example, by journalists writing about young people and gang culture, which demonized them and distorted the role that racism, economic hardship, and housing play. So many of the issues are still pertinent today, such as police stop and search laws, Tory cuts to services, and racism, things that don't feel vanish but reshape in time. I had a QR code which allowed viewers to access the archive outside of the space, which you can also scan now if you like, and that will allow you to access the archive digitally. So the material ended up being both a contextual and historical device for the video that I'm about to show you. Having them both occupy the same space was a way of having two generational and intersectional perspectives of the same area coexist. The video was shot using a drone, and I wanted it to have a disorientating effect of moving up and down a familiar space until you eventually transcend towards a different perspective. The soundtrack includes recordings I made in nightclubs of me arguing with my boyfriend, me sleep talking, and it ends with a recording of my dad playing the flute not long before he passed away. It moves from being frantic to soothing, a bit like a consciousness slipping away. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the screening. Thank you.
So now we will move from the multidisciplinary work of Prem Sahib to the filmmaker Rehana Zaman's work from an entirely different perspective. Rehana is an artist who works predominantly with moving image to examine how social dynamics are produced and performed.
Where do you begin tracing genealogy when access to direct ancestry is barely remembered? Lineages mapped by cousins, no longer on speaking terms, continents apart, languages lost. Oral histories that stammer and yield to fantasies of uniqueness, marked by royal blood or foreigner fetish. We meet somewhere in Mera, in Rawalpindi in Islamabad. Another unreliable narrator, another estranged cousin. Is there a word for an aspirational past, willing grandeur into past lives, origin as a point of projection? Our proximity to the northern border regions, Punjab but close to the borders of Jammu, Kashmir, gives each narrative credibility and uncertainty. My knowledge is scant, a patchwork, agricultural, poor tribal communities, waves of immigration that bestowed limited wealth on the entrepreneurial migrant spirit, warped bureaucracies, corruption, and tightly woven familial ties, untranslatable to Google searches and redacted documents in UK archives. I weave my own flights of fantasy, drifting with the pre-Islamic communities of Hunza, the spectacular mountainous region furthermost north of Pakistan, popular with European holiday hikers, where the boundaries between the spiritual plane and material world are porous, and spirits, ghosts, and giants move freely amongst earthly beings. I hover on the figure of the Baitan, the shaman who inhales juniper, drinks the blood of a goat, and dances ecstatically to commune with the Barian, resolving communal tensions and channeling agricultural forecasts. The work. The work is that which ties, the liberatory, the ritualistic, the anti-racist, the anti-colonial, and the sexual, and how the sexual functions as an organizing principle of the social, inflected by the peculiar dynamics of what we categorize as race, class, gender, sexuality, disability. I sink my fingers into the earth. I pull at weeds, tend to shoots, unsucker slugs, pluck fruits and harvest ripened vegetables. It could be a metaphor for art. We are grateful it's not. My fingernails are black, the dirt refusing to come unstuck. Watching and understanding the behavior of soil, the movement of the sun across a patch of land, working to seasonal time as February gives way to March, what can be nurtured and set in motion. And as the days become darker, plant carcasses slowly lay down in their beds. I learn about the medicinal properties of valerian, chamomile, lemon balm, amaranth, and see plants flourish in the temperate climes of Walthamstow. I yearn for a greenhouse to grow tulsi, not yet ready to extend the growing process into one of extraction and application. My horticulturalism is strictly amateur, my Ayurvedic aspirations minor. I'm working with slow time, cyclical time, nuclear time. I'm working in spirals. My brother asks me to make a film about his life, something I unthinkingly swerve for a year, not sure I can endorse such degrees of narcissism. He visits and stays with me after traveling to tantric workshops in Corfu, ayahuasca ceremonies in Hertfordshire. In recent years, we've barely spoken, but he loops back in. I organize a dinner for South Asian women, trans, intersex, and cis, and non-binary people, beginning with a close group from my own immediate circle. We are Indian, Kenyan, Pakistani, South African, Dutch, English, Scottish, Bengali, mixed Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, of mixed class and caste, comp and private school educated, homeowners and renters, creatives and educators. We eat biryani, pakore, and mango salad, crafted lovingly by artist and chef extraordinaire Raju Rage. And I pose 3 questions to the table. Number 1, what is our shared ancestral knowledge? Number 2, is it possible to locate South Asian critical thought that accounts for differences across class, caste, religion, and paths of migration that move across different continents? How do we begin to account for this within this room, and is it embodied in our working relationships and friendships? The contemporary fractures and transgenerational fissures run painfully deep. Number 3, after the gifts of Black feminism, how might we articulate erotics in relation to South Asianness, in inverted commas, in all its clumsy articulation? Where and how do we begin? How do we make sense, again in inverted commas, make sense of our experience as racialized subjects, fetishized and constituted through racist structures that are distinctly sexual in nature, the passivity and demureness of an Asian woman, the hijab as a source of desire and terror, the Asian males rendering as either absent of any sexuality or as exercising a depraved, predatory sexuality, grooming gangs, ISIS brides, and radicalized freedom fighters posing as bedroom pinups on Instagram. So with these thoughts, I returned to my brother and his invitation to film, a testimony, a flight of fancy, a film synopsis. If I was to understand better where the ancestral and the erotic lie within a context of whiteness and how sexual agency might be put to work as activism, where best to start than here. So this year, as part of my practice of slowness, I had planned 2, which isn't so slow, trips to Pakistan. One in April to work on Charlene's film in Karachi, and then again in September to work on my own in Lahore. As it became clear neither trip would happen because of the pandemic, I've been dwelling on what this work is when the physical imperative to move, to be in a place, is taken away. Maybe, and probably, this gesture of travel isn't slow enough. So I'm beginning again, not with travel, but with land and grounding. And like so many people over lockdown 1 and 2, I've been spending a lot of time in the garden, one of the privileged few to have access to one in Walthamstow, building on a source of joy and release over the last few years, learning about cultivation, land justice, growing foods to eat, maintain health, and coming into a relation with the complexity of soil, conjuring, to quote Dia Taylor. This is part intuitive, part known, a process of divination, finding an acquaintance in the tangles that connect to rural mountain regions in the Western Himalayas prior to and post-partition, where for generations, my family members labored on farms, never their own, unlearning the caste and class-based stigma of this work in my own efforts to proudly dig and till. I'm alert to how questions of land cultivation and ownership here in the UK carry with them an interconnected and distinct set of antagonisms around enclosure, dispossession, and property. And so, as mentioned through this process of working through and sifting within the film and via the baruchos of Hunza, I became aware of how the ancient rituals of shamans within this community have become bastardized as part of the tourist industry and mediated to outsiders. So the ritual becomes a performative act largely for tourists who prior to the pandemic frequent the region. But so much of what is retained and remains legible, despite this, is an approach to social relations, agriculture, community accountability through an alternative epistemology that is holistic, that connects the rational with the felt and the cosmological. An imperative that feels so crucial to not only how we make, but how we relate to one another and the world or worlds that we move through. I'm grappling with this, how we are posed with an opportunity to approach the world, research, art making, through a practice of ceremony, to decenter the extractive, exploitative logics of white supremacy, and learning from indigenous methodologies, how we might reorganize our relation to land, resources, spirit, alert to the ways in which we might uproot the creeping tendrils of settler colonial logic, the fetishizing gaze, the non-relationality, or the surface level interaction with otherness that again reproduces this notion of ownership and property. So I'm thinking of this in the context of being diaspora and seeking both some reconnection to what is lost or missed and the fantasies and the fictions within that projection, to try and actively sit with the discomfort of the ethics of incommensurability, to quote Eve Tuck and Kei Wen Yang, acknowledging what is not in common and acting on the demands of that acknowledgement. So I'm now going to share a clip from Tell Me the Story of All These Things, which goes back to 2017. It's a 2-minute clip of a 23-minute film that threads an accumulation of several narratives together, one of which is an intimate conversation between myself and my sister, ominous animated visions of a metamorphosing body, and e-learning training on Prevent, the UK government's counter-terrorism strategy. The work takes its title from Teresa Hak-Kyung-cha's novel Dictate, a novel that deploys a variety of texts to examine themes of dislocation and fragmentation. Taking Cha's work as a departure point, the film explores processes of disassembling as constitutive of lived experience. Thanks.
So yeah, I was saying earlier that I think being brought up in two different countries has kind of, in my personality, made me kind of adapt to different people, different societies, and how I always kind of feel I have to adapt to a certain environment. So if I'm in a mosque, I'll change to a different environment. If I'm at a college, if I'm with women in Dubai, like, I'm very different. So, but I do know when I'm skiing, I'm me. That's what I figured out. When I'm home, I'm me. When I'm outside the house, maybe I've just lost who is me. That's what I'm discovering by just doing the things that I like, and that's why I've reduced work, because I used to feel that I was just working for and losing in touch with my daughters. Because ultimately you want to bring your children up in a world where they feel safe and comfortable and do the things they love. And since I've reduced my work, I felt that there's been a different change at the workplace, where they feel that, oh, she's rich enough to not work. And it's not like that. I just choose to consume less and just live my life on and be happy. And I think this has just happened this year, and this is why I went to Dubai. And I'm thinking, could I actually live in a place like this? It's just, for a very short time I could, to make my money and to bring enough money back to make this kitchen really nice. But other than that, I think now I'm being me.
So now, from moving image to performance, I'm delighted to introduce you to Bishi. Bishi is a 4-octave singer, electric sitarist, producer and composer. She was born in London of Bengali heritage and is also the founder of Which. So I'm delighted to present Bishi. Thank you.
I just wanted to start by saying that that was an incredibly powerful film, Rehana, and there's the sentiments in that film that I absolutely feel throughout all of my work. So it kind of makes for a really beautiful thematic link. So thank you. My name is Bishi. I am a multidisciplinary composer, vocalist, multi-instrumentalist, producer, performer, and founder of Which is the Women in Technology Creative Industries Hub, a platform to elevate the voices of women and non-binary genders. Ooh, okay. I was born in London. My parents immigrated from Calcutta and West Bengal to London in the 70s. This is a picture of my mother in the pink sari and a picture of the poet Tagore. My mother is a very esteemed and respected musician and vocalist, and she is an expert in the music of Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore is a polymath. He wrote a canon of about 3,000 songs. He was a playwright, he was an architect, he was an artist, and he was a great symbol of India's independence away from the British Empire. His influence has been felt throughout all of my work, through the 3 albums. He always pops up in one form or another. As a teenager, I was trained in the piano. I was trained in Eastern classical vocal music and Western classical vocal music. I taught myself the bass guitar and started playing in bands. I got into electronic music, so I taught myself the basics of home studio production, and I got into things like synthesizers and Moogs, and got into folk music, so it was all ukuleles and auto harps for the first single, or the first album, I should say. But in my late teens, I started to go on yearly pilgrimages to Delhi, to learn from an esteemed sitarist called Gaurav Mozumdar, who is a senior disciple of Ravi Shankar, hence the picture of him here. And I took it in a much more untraditional place, which they didn't really like, but hey ho. So this is me on stage actually for St. George's Day in Trafalgar Square. And I'm playing my electric sitar, which is a studio sitar, which is half the size of a classical concert sitar. And Sagur Ross's sound woman actually suggested that I use these pickups, and then I turned it into the electric sitar, and I'm still developing that concept as I continue to make music. This is me in my club kid days. A little bit more about that to follow. In my teens, I met the radical performance art band called Minty, who were founded by the late Lee Bowery. And I really found out about London countercultures and subcultures and LGBTQ culture and fashion culture. And that has had a huge impact on how I present. And I also feel that the LGBTQ counterculture of the late 90s and early aughts really helped me to find confidence. You know, I think I've grown up in the great schism of British culture and of Asian culture, and I've never felt fully embraced by either culture. And I feel that queer culture is what gave me my confidence to be the woman that I am today. So I met Minty when they were being led by Nicola Bowery and artist Matthew Harden. We worked on my first 2 albums together. Call of the Tiger was a piece which was commissioned by the Whitechapel Art Gallery. That's a picture of me in a sensor suit where I control all of the sound and the visuals. The interactivity was designed by an artist called Oscar Soul. The piece was directed by Matthew Harden, and the music was worked on between Neil Kaiser, myself, and Matthew Harden, and it was premiered at the Whitechapel Art Gallery. And this was our collective beginning into really using technology into my performance work. This influenced the live presentation of the album Albion Voice. We started to play with projection as being the central performance theme. Albion Voice is an album which explores ideas of race and intersectionality and power. What does it mean to be British, and who holds the power? How do you subvert power? So inspired by, I think, like Victorian colonial painting, and also by Jamie Reed and Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood, we were subverting ideas of royalty and monarchy and power. This is me as the Queen, and this is me as Boudica. And a lot of this artwork ended up in one of the Queen's official exhibitions, and also in a documentary called London, the Modern Babylon by the filmmaker Julian Temple. So he understood how we were being inspired by the punk movement. The entire album is a one-woman projection show, and we were really lucky that we got to play venues like Coco London, the BFI South Bank, the Kitchen in New York, the Hong Kong Art Fair, and we finished our run at the Queen Elizabeth Hall. Now, during the touring of Albion Voice Live, I realized that there were some incredible women and non-binary artists who were really working with music and with technology and with coding and performance. If you look at something called the F-list, there's a statistic that only a fifth of all working female artists are actually signed to a publishing company, and less than a quarter of all working female and female identifying artists are signed to a record label. So women have to set up their own spaces. And also, as a woman of color in the music industry, as soon as you hit 30, there's a decline in any chance of you being promoted or being invested in. you can look at UK Music's diversity report, which just came out a couple of weeks ago. So this was a part of the motivation to start Which, the Women in Technology Creative Industries Hub. And for the past 3 years, I have curated events and salons, and I have also curated a festival called the State of Gender. We've had guests such as Imogen Heap, Anna Matronic, Leslie DeRay, Gazelle Twin, and up-and-coming artists such as Rebecca Ubuntu and Miri Cat from the Algarve scene. During lockdown, I launched a podcast called Creative Women in Tech, and you can subscribe to us through Spotify and Apple and Google. We've had guests such as Hannah Peel and Di Mainstone and Laura Kriefman, and Series 2 was launched this morning with an episode with Anna Meredith, which I really suggest you all give a listen because she is so fascinating. So I'm going to stop the share and ask to play a video from our festival highlights. Let My Country Awake is my third album, and it was supposed to be released this year, but it's been postponed for release in 2021 due to the global pandemic that we find ourselves in. Let My Country Awake is an album written by myself for voice looper, sitar, electronics. I have co-produced this album with a composer and sound artist called Jeff Cook, who's based in New York. This album was commissioned by National Sawdust, who are a contemporary arts and contemporary classical music space based in Brooklyn, New York. The song cycle was part inspired by a collection of essays called The Good Immigrant, edited by Nikesh Shukla. Nikesh Shukla, Selena Godden, and Darren Chetty, who have all written essays, all feature an audio contribution peppered throughout the song cycle. This is a picture of the opening night of me at National Sawdust. This picture was actually taken by Jenny Livingston, who directed a legendary documentary called Paris is Burning, documentary the voguing and ballroom scene of the late 80s and early 90s in New York, so it has an extra special history there. During the album's making and recording, I was doing some voice training with the esteemed composer and choreographer and titan of the New York avant-garde called Meredith Monk. I then came back to London, and I've started to realise this as a one-woman live-coded art show with the arts duo Output Arts. So this is on me, Mrs. Me on stage at the Rich Mix last year. And I'm going to stop the share, and we're going to look at some highlights from this live show. during lockdown, I have focused on a release called Don't Shoot the Messenger, which was produced by Tony Visconti, who is famed for his work with David Bowie, T-Rex, Sparks, and Thin Lizzy, to name a few rock music titans there. I began by MIDI mapping my sitar into my Ableton Push and building up a song of sitar loops and voice loops. And we recorded it in this analog studio as a part of Kingston University called the Visconti Studio. That's us at the end of the recording day, which was incredibly special for me. And the single actually premiered as an AR and VR performance, which was live streamed to Amazon Music via Twitch. This is a very low res, very, very short clip to finish off this presentation. But I've increasingly been working with a mixed reality company called Volta, and we're just at the beginning of our relationship. And I find that during lockdown, it's almost like I've been learning a new interface or a new piece of technology, or just constantly updating my technological skills. However, I found this truly liberating. Thank you so much.
I have to say, I'm really, really honoured to have hosted all of the artist speakers tonight. It's really amazing to have you all here. So now we're going to move into our final part of the event, which is our Q&A section. So if you've been viewing Zoom in active speaker mode, you can now toggle to gallery view by selecting the icon in the top right-hand corner. And now you'll be able to see all the speakers. So if all the speakers can turn on their videos, that would be great. I have a few questions that I have prepared that I'd like to ask the speakers, but we'd also like to invite the audience to ask questions, which you can do by clicking on the Q&A box below and then typing in your questions, and we'll endeavour to answer them as we go through. So I'll kick us off with a question I have prepared. So I'll start with Bishi, as you've just presented. It's great. I've always been such a huge fan of your work.
Thank you.
I feel that you've been exploring these themes within your practice for over a decade now, and you've really been at the forefront of this discourse. I wondered if you could talk a bit about how things are changing within the art world from the kind of early times when you've been working to now, and what you hope might happen in the future.
Yeah, sure. Well, obviously, I was making work about intersectionality and sort of questioning my British and my Asian identity at a time when the conversation was just not on the table, and it was met with bafflement. And, you know, and actually, I'm really happy that the fact that it has become such a big part of the conversation, and people are increasingly starting to value that conversation. And you know, people of color are beginning, like their opinions are beginning to be heard. I mean, although it's very frustrating on the one hand, it is also incredibly liberating. My hope is that this, you know, all of the inspiration that we provide isn't just going to be appropriated and isn't just going to be window dressing. My hope is that we are actually invested in and that we are actually supported, and that this moves on to a stage of, you know, not just people saying that they're inclusive, but actually being inclusive and making proper space. I mean, just some of the initiatives that I'm involved in music, the entry level, like interestingly for mixed race people and for people of color, is huge. And then there's this drop off at 30, and it's like, hang on a minute, you know. So I just want to make sure that we keep on, and we keep on having these discussions, and we keep putting the pressure on and kind of reminding people that you can't just say you're inclusive. You actually have to show, you actually have to make space and invest properly in artists.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. I don't know if any of the other speakers also want to speak to that idea of how things are changing in the art world at all. or I can throw over a couple more questions. We've got some questions coming in on the chat, so please do keep throwing them in there. I'll read a question to Rehana now. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the CGI figure that you feature in Tell Me a Story of All of These Things. I found it a really powerful kind of depiction of the female form, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about her, how she's created, and what you're kind of hoping to portray with that.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Bishi and Prem and everyone for really brilliant, interesting presentations. It's strange, I'm sort of in that world still. So, but in regards to the CGI footage, yeah, she came from, actually the version that you see in this film comes from an earlier iteration. I think that's where the beginnings of that kind of exploration with that figure came from, a show that I had called Giantess, which preceded it by a year. And it was really inspired by thinking about this term of the figure of the brown woman as a figure where where terror and desire conflate. It's a term that this idea I first encountered in the writing of Saidiya Hartman in an essay called Venus in Two Acts, where she talks about the recurring figure of the Venus, and she's speaking specifically around Black women within transatlantic, through the Middle Passage, and exploring this idea of fiction within those spaces of historical artifacts. So for me, it was just sort of really feeling quite moved and inspired by that, but also thinking about actually how does this experience of terror and desire as a conflation open up a set of questions when I'm thinking about the conversation that I'm having with my sister, for instance. So the figure was, it's actually like video game technology. So it's an avatar, right? So she's coming from like a program where actually you have quite a restricted set of body types, phenotypes, and there's quite limited in what you can do, which was also like a kind of an intervention into how to manipulate this space and how to work with this space. And the film itself is multiple figurations of Farah. You encounter her through the Prevent footage, you encounter her through her own voice and conversation, you encounter a double figure elsewhere in the film through like documentary footage. But then the sort of the rendering, or the unrendered figure, actually it's all unrendered footage, is another space to play with this characterization and this the figuring in a way that allowed me to be much more, to kind of manipulate and try and escape the body. Actually, ultimately at that point, I was trying to escape this body or this form and this idea of the figure. And so as somebody who's rising from the land, so actually the giantess idea came from these sort of fetish videos that I was looking at on YouTube, which are these macrophilic like fetish videos that figure often women of color actually in these kind of huge forms that go around like crushing people and crushing men. So there's this destructive force. So these were the very early renderings that I was sort of playing around with. And then she kind of ended up in this film being quite bored and disobedient. So yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for exploring that a bit more with us further. It's really interesting as well to see that there was maybe an initial inspiration from this notion of a goddess. And I sort of picked up that there in the beginning when I was we're relating to the National Galleries collection as well. So there is this kind of like little thread there that sort of feeds through.
She's a sort of a puking goddess.
Yeah. We've had a couple of questions from the audience. I have one which is from a young South Asian artist curator. What tips do you have to stay true to your morals and values whilst working in the arts? Does anyone want to speak to that?
Yeah, I don't have any.
So I guess you're an organizer, Bishi, aren't you? Working with, so you setting those parameters, I suppose, for inclusion, or how do you do that? How do you deal with kind of equal opportunities and things like that as a person in a position of responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, because I come from a background of putting on clubs, I'm very holistic and I'm very just instinctual with things and people I like. Like, I'm really lucky that I just keep bumping into people who are brilliant, and not only is their work brilliant, but they're really cool people as well. And I feel that that comes from that sort of early to mid aughts club culture of just like freaks sort of finding each other. And I'm definitely, as I'm moving Witch onto like another level, and just everything that I do. I mean, firstly, all of my productions and like all of my albums and my stage shows, I've been the executive producer on. And because of the nature of how everything was made, it was mostly a very like highly represented LGBTQ or sort of gender non-conforming crew of people who was putting things together anyway. So I don't feel like I've known any different. But I definitely, especially with looking at Witch and just looking at the data of, women and gender minorities, I definitely feel like I have to do more work searching for even more inclusivity and even more diversity, and to make sure that I'm providing a certain amount of support. And, we're constantly learning and we're constantly evolving. But I think you really just have to go on instinct and just not put so much pressure on yourself. I think it's brilliant to kind of have those morals, but I think you've also got to, just have fun and just not put so much pressure on yourself. That's what I think anyway.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm really interested in then to ask Prem a little bit more about your work. So it was amazing to be able to feature your film, the complete film, Cul-de-sac. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the work. And you've used drones, which are they have this kind of voyeuristic quality, and they're quite loaded as a sort of technology to use. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about your decision to use them in this piece.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thank you all as well. I've learned so much and it's been incredible to hear you all speak and share a space with you. I guess the drone was really about kind of achieving a new perspective on one that was already really familiar. So kind of walking up and down the street was a familiar view, and then kind of the drone allowed me to kind of move above that. And it kind of allowed for this disembodied view, which was really interesting to me because I'd been thinking a lot about how you kind of get out of yourself, and the structures and spaces I'm interested in are usually kind of arranged in a way which are about escaping yourself or escaping societal constraints or escaping the body. So there was something about the use of the drone that really kind of felt appropriate. And that I tried to emphasize that a little bit with the edit being kind of blinking almost at the beginning. So it was kind of like an eye. But yeah, I wasn't necessarily thinking in terms of military surveillance, but definitely surveillance and how kind of identities are regulated or contained or policed in a way. So yeah, that was my intention behind the use of the drone. Also, I kind of discovered that seeing the street from above, a cul-de-sac from above, meant it became quite bodily because it became this big giant phallus.
Brilliant. Yeah, I hadn't actually seen that. So now I have. So it's great.
You can't unsee it, basically.
Exactly. No, it's such a pleasure to be able to have featured your film. I wondered, Stuart, now, if I could ask you about the Shemza Digital project and how we are sort of opening up our artwork to an audience and trying to make it as accessible as possible. And perhaps this is made possible through the technology that we're using. Can you talk a little bit more about that and sort of where that came from?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, yeah, a big part of it came from the lockdown itself, right? Like the desire for you to take this kind of work online, and then through that be able to disseminate it just across the globe. Yeah, I think in terms of making art kind of more accessible to people through these tools, I think there's something to be said about creating works of art or just anything creative yourself, and then being able to kind of see a piece of that or to understand art in a deeper way through that. So I think this tool kind of, it takes that idea and anyone can use it just by kind of clicking and dragging. So you kind of immediately get work that, you know, looks somewhat nice, hopefully. And so through that, you know, through that ability of, you know, that idea of thinking with your hands and thinking through like making something, it connects you more to the ideas behind the work. So you'll perhaps begin to understand Anwar's ideas a lot more, or Islamic geometry, or, you know, have a greater admiration for, you know, minimal aesthetics and things like that. So, and I think that that's you know, you can give people pencils and pens, but you know, they can do anything that they want with that. Whereas using generative art in this way and making drawing tools in this way, you can restrict people, and through that kind of restriction almost make it like a collaboration with whatever artist was the influence for that. You know, you kind of say, hey, think with your hands in this way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stuart. So a question to all the panelists now, which I think will be our final question, or there's one coming in from the audience as well. I'm just going to pick between them. I'll just do this question about cultural heritage. So when did you start exploring your cultural heritage within your career? Did you always explore this, or is it something that's come later on? And how does technology allow you to explore these ideas? I don't know if anyone wants to sort of pick up on that sort of when you.
Yeah, I mean, personally, it just went hand in hand from the start. I've never really known anything different. I think there's such a huge schism between the cultures, and that space in between is such madness and such chaos and so incredible, like all at once, that it's really hard to not make work from that perspective. But I'm interested in, you know, maybe everyone else feels differently. I don't know. You know, that's just me.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, I would say that it's always been implicit in the things that I make, but maybe more so in the last couple of years when I made the Descent show, that I kind of dealt with my cultural heritage more overtly. But it's always kind of been part of my the place in which I make work from, in a way. But I guess navigating that in a world where people like to put you in certain boxes has meant that I've also tried to be a bit kind of cautious in how I hone a voice in relation to it, so that I can be talking about these things that matter to me and are deeply personal on my own terms as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I feel like similarly, like I think I draw or have drawn a lot on what I know. I feel like that's kind of a solid ground to make work from, but it might not have necessarily explicitly dealt with cultural heritage. Actually, like I come from a really big family. Like I've got many brothers and sisters, and so actually like a recurring interest for me, and it's nice to hear Prem speak earlier, is actually group dynamics, and that's a recurring feature of my work. And like, so thinking about the kind of different structures that influence how people come together and form community, or the kind of actually the ways in which people can disaffect and fall out of that. But then I think back to art school and making work about like my family and like my background, and actually it being really hard actually, and you know, being in an all-white environment where there's not much conversation around that, and you know, you're one person, and particularly at that time and on my undergraduate, you know, it wasn't, I think that the terms have changed a little bit more recently, and we're in one of those upswells where there's a lot more kind of interest, and that being problematic in some ways as well. Maybe something connecting with what Bishi said about like the potential fetishizing. But yeah, after that experience as a very young like art student, feeling kind of very aware at how difficult it was to find kind of a space in which to explore those questions, and so allowing some of those very explicit concerns to fall away for a few years and to explore other things, and yeah, like maybe Prem said, there's those concerns being present but maybe not as explicit, and then yeah, over the last 10 years finally finding my feet again and finding a way to make that more direct. I think there was a point where actually it almost was like a snapping point where it was like, actually, I want to make this stuff more direct and have a conversation about racism, or have a conversation about the domination of certain demographics of people within the art world that are really problematic in terms of how exploitative that is, and that kind of very oppressive and violent structure in which we're expected to move and operate. So yeah, I guess it comes and goes, doesn't it? And then, you know, and I'm also conscious of not wanting to exploit and self fetishize. So
yeah, absolutely.
Always in these constant tensions, really. So I just have to go with where my heart is, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That's all you can do.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, we could really talk for hours about these topics, but I'm afraid I will have to round off this evening's event. I just want to thank all of you so much, all the speakers, to Stuart Batchelor, to Prem Sahib, to Rehana Zaman, to Bishi, to my Art in Flux co-hosts, Maria Almina and Oliver Gingrich, of course to Priyesh Mystery and the incredible National Gallery team for hosting us tonight. I really want to thank the audience for listening, and I'll now hand over to Priyesh, who will just round off this evening's event from the National Gallery's point of view. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aphra. And thank you to our speakers this evening for such a brilliant discussion. I think it's been wonderful to see how the National Gallery and its collection can be used as a platform in this way for you to share your work and to explore a lot of the questions that we're all kind of thinking about. Certainly I'm thinking about, especially, you know, in my position at the National Gallery. But also what I found really fascinating about this evening was how these questions were explored through technology and the structures that they create, which are so sort of ubiquitous and complicated at the same time. But then also to use these developments to make a lot of these questions a bit more accessible, or to be able to share them and find that network and find that way of coming together and finding your peers.
Thank you so much to Priyesh, and I'll just hand over to Maria, who will round off this evening's event with the Digital Weekender. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aphra, and to all the speakers for such an inspirational event. To finish, I would like to invite you all to my first curated media art festival for the Waterman's Art Center. This is happening this weekend entirely online on the 21st and 22nd of November. We have a fantastic, rich program, including live media performances, coding workshops, virtual exhibitions, video art programs with Q&A, several online interactive activities, and AV performances. The festival is showcasing the work from Kimatica Studio, Art in Flux, Amy Gottchild, Mowgli, Aphra, Shemza, and Oliver Gingrich. You can find more information and book your donation tickets on the link on the chat, and hoping to see you there. Thanks for watching.